Welcome to another edition of World Talks here on TVP World. I'm your host, Benjamin Lee, and please join me and my guests on this next interview. A new report from the European Council on Foreign Relations argues that Donald Trump's return has reignited a cultural war, and this time, Europe is on the front lines. The study warns that MAGA ideology isn't just a U.S. phenomenon, but part of a broader push to reshape European politics and potentially weaken EU cohesion. Joining us now on TVP World is Paweł Zerka, the report's lead author and senior policy fellow at the European Council on Foreign Relations. Hello, sir, and welcome to TVP World.
Good morning, and thanks for having me.
So I would really like to dive into your report because it paints quite a dramatic picture in which you describe Trump's scripting crisis and Europe acting passively. But how much real influence does he really wield over European voters as well as governments?
I think a lot, but listen, it's difficult to discuss this when you're a Pole like me, or especially it's difficult to discuss it in countries like Poland or the Baltics. Today, your program is dominated by the news from the Warsaw Security Forum, and rightly so. When you look at the agenda of the forum, however, you will notice that there is very little discussion about the transatlantic relations. It's mostly focused on the war in Ukraine, on how Europe can prepare for its own defense. And when the title suggests that the discussion will be about the transatlantic relations, still it is framed in rather optimistic terms. As, for example, one of the panel says that whatever doesn't kill you will make you stronger. And I think that it's understandable for people in Poland and for governments in Central and Eastern Europe to be cautiously optimistic about the transatlantic relations. There is no usefulness in being too assertive, because this risks to strain the relations with the US president even further. However, I think that European leaders as well as the public would benefit from looking more clear-eyedly at what is happening in the transatlantic relations today. And what we suggest in our report by ECFR is that there is a culture war between the Trump's America and Europe happening today. It happens at two levels. On one level, there is an intentional effort on the part of the US administration to shift the ideological center of European politics. That's what we have seen, for example, in the US administration's involvement in domestic politics, from Germany to Poland ahead of the presidential elections to Romania. But also we have seen that Vice President J.D. Vance has been active in shaping the discussion about what the West should be about, what freedom of speech is about. And in those speeches, he has questioned Europe's legitimacy in positioning itself as a defender of democracy and freedom of speech. So there is one level in which there is an active debate about what Europe is about, and Europe's approach to democracy is actively undermined by the American administration. Still, what is, however, even more dangerous to my mind is the second level, at which the US president and people around him are using any opportunity to humiliate Europe, whether it's about the NATO summit, where Europeans are kind of forced to accept a certain number of defense spending. Even if we agree that Europe should increase its defense spending, still the whole event in The Hague at the beginning of the summer was kind of humiliating for Europe, because in a broad understanding, most countries agreed to that abstract number, mostly to placate the American president. And then you can also mention the peace talks around Ukraine war, where European leaders are rarely involved and are not treated as equals by the American president, or the tariff tensions, whereby Europe was forced to accept a very asymmetric arrangement in the transatlantic trade. So if you take all of those elements together, you can see a very active effort to humiliate Europe. Also, the UN speech by President Donald Trump, where he mocked Europe's migration and climate policies. However, on that level, it's mostly European leaders also who are exposing themselves to humiliation, and because they are not showing the assertiveness that they normally could afford. So that's for me the culture war happening today between Trump's America and Europe.
Right, that's definitely a lot to unpack here, and I would like to go into these things point by point. Like you mentioned, there's a lot of attempts at kind of shifting the narrative when it comes to how Europe conducts its politics. And of course, this has caused a lot of ripples. One of the things that you mentioned in the report is how Trump has directly supported Karol Nawrocki in the 2025 elections. And on what basis can we make this claim, and how realistically do you think that was carried out?
You mean how much intentional was the U.S. involvement in Polish politics? I think that you have.
Sorry, I'm talking about more like logistically, how is that being done, and how much influence do you think this has when it comes to the presidential election?
So you never know how much decisive of a factor has this support by Donald Trump and his administration been on Poland's presidential election. What is, however, new to the transatlantic relations today is that the U.S. president and his administration are not hiding their intention to be involved in domestic politics of European countries. So in Poland, it was Karol Nawrocki who was directly supported by them. In German federal elections, AfD, the far-right party, was also supported actively by Elon Musk, who was then part of the administration, as well as J.D. Vance. And we see it across Europe, even in countries which seem marginal in terms of their importance for a broader European dynamic. And even in case of presidential candidates who don't seem to be very serious. So, for example, in Ireland, Donald Trump supported martial arts fighter Colin McGregor, who eventually dropped from the race. But it was also another show that even in marginal races, the U.S. administration wants to be active because it wants to shape the narrative on the ground about the values that should be part of politics. Like the politics should be about being against migration, against climate, against wokeism. And so they support candidates and parties who are allied with MAGA and Donald Trump in focusing on those matters. I think that U.S. administration is trying to shift this political center of European politics because it's not also good for them to have partners who think alike across Europe, but it's also in the America's very direct interest to have Europe who is more divided and where governments are more ideologically aligned with the US administration.
All right. You previously mentioned be it the climate issue, the immigration issue, and you wrote in your report about this coordinated MAGA-style movement in Europe. But isn't there a risk of seeing ideological coordination where there's really just populism with the local roots as well?
Of course, Trump and his team are using exploiting the circumstances whereby the far right has already been rising across most of Europe. So they are not the factor which suddenly gave rise to parties like Rassemblement National in France or AfD in Germany. However, I think that the re-election of Donald Trump in America is changing the rules of the game a lot. So it's one thing to have Europe whereby the far right and nationalist conservatives are rising across the continent, but it's a completely different world when the same ideological orientation is defended by the US president, who is giving an example and a model for all those parties. And since he has been re-elected, that shows that he was not an accident back in 2016, that there is something broader and more serious happening in America. He can therefore serve as a real inspiration and a model for parties and leaders across Europe who are also, this is another big difference compared to 8 years ago, who are actively seeking an alignment and close links with him. I think that it's an important matter. Of course, many people in Poland or in Central and Eastern Europe would say that, okay, Trump will be over and then transatlantic relations will come back to normal. I think that the key message that I am trying to convey is that we shouldn't have that assumption, because after Trump, we can have J.D. Vance's 2 presidencies, and really the shift in the transatlantic relations can be broader, more serious, and inevitable already.
All right, thank you so much for your input and insight. Really appreciate it, and thanks for being with us on TVP World.
Have a good day. Bye.
Cheers. And thank you for tuning into this edition of World Talks. But for more news, update, and commentary, please stay tuned to TVP World.